It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, and welcome back to this episode's returning guest. Michael Stepniewski is a retired businessman who was born in Long Beach, California, but has been living in the Pacific Northwest since 1971. He studied English literature for 4 years, first at Washington State University, then at the University of Washington. And his independent study of Shakespeare began as early as 1986, but by 1987, took him 11 years, a little bit of a late bloomer there, Mike, he decided that it needed to focus more on the Earl of Oxford. Since 2010, he has been convinced that Oxford actually rejected the name De Vere because it was untrue. His books are posted on his website. We'll talk about his website a little more in the episode. It is Oxford-Seymour, Seymour.com. That's Oxford-Seymour.com. Mike, welcome back to Don't Quill the Messenger.
Yeah, good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Your website makes it very clear that you believe Edward de Vere was actually the illegitimate son of Thomas Seymour and Elizabeth I.
Right. Princess Elizabeth.
Yes, right. Before she was queen, right?
Right.
And no bones about it. That's the title of the website that makes it very clear. Hey, this is the path of study. These are the theories that we are pursuing here. And if you want to know more about that, this is the place to go.
Right.
Now, you base that on a lot of things. And for our listeners who might be a little out of the loop of that, and we've touched on this topic a few times over the years through the series, but I don't think we've really dug down deep into like the weeds of it. And I think we need to do that a little bit today for the listeners, because we do have historical record of Thomas Seymour paying very early morning visits to the Princess Elizabeth's bedchamber in nothing more than his own nightdress, and accounts of him smacking her on the buttocks, even crawling in bed with her while she was only wearing her nightgown. And even moments in the record where attendants recorded that even Thomas's wife, Catherine, joined him in the princess's bedchamber on occasion, including crawling in bed with her and, as the record says, tickling her in bed. This is all historical truth, right?
Right. And there's one incident of particular interest where Catherine Parr and Thomas Seymour cut Princess Elizabeth's clothing from her body, and who knows what that was all about. But
that is a crazy story that was recorded back then by servants who apparently witnessed it happen, and of course then would have to like redress her. But according to the account, it was in the garden, right?
Right.
And according to the account, Catherine is holding Elizabeth while Thomas is cutting her clothing off of her body with a knife into what is described as, and this is a direct quote, 100 pieces.
Yeah, it's been surmised that Catherine Parr was trying to observe firsthand whether Elizabeth might be pregnant.
Oh. Now, see, I took it in sort of a kinky, like threesome type of way, that they were like playing around with the young princess. And then, there's an account later on where Catherine discovers Elizabeth and Thomas together alone in each other's arms. And the very next day, Elizabeth is sent away to live with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. These, of course, are secondhand accounts, or I suppose firsthand in some cases, but we don't have a lot of solid evidence about it. And I try not to pay too much attention to the historic record because I often doubt historic records as much as I do literary records.
That's kind of the name of the game around here, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
But that goes for all history. I am very, very doubtful about much of it.
so, in reviewing all of this, and that's interesting because, my thought was that Catherine was sort of playing along with this, that they were having fun with this young girl. And of course,
but Thomas was having more fun.
Apparently, Catherine gets pregnant right about the time that she catches Thomas and Elizabeth alone together. And I almost feel like she sends Elizabeth away because she realizes, well, I'm pregnant and I'm going to be going into like the pregnancy seclusion that was common of the time. And I'm not going to be able to be a part of this anymore. And so I'm going to be excluded from this three-way. And that's going to leave Thomas and Elizabeth alone together. And I'm not going to be able to monitor what they're doing. I'm not going to be able to be a part of what they're doing. And perhaps even fearful that he would fall for Elizabeth more. As is common what happens in these three-way love triangle types of things, the third party, one of the members of this whole polyamory thing that's going on in the world today, almost always the new partner, one of the partners ends up falling for the new partner and the old partner gets left out in the cold. It's either that or maybe she had a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out of the action. That was the way. Yeah. That's where my brain went. I guess maybe I have a dirty mind. I don't know, but that's where that's where my brain went.
Well, yeah, I think it may be a little different. I suspect that Elizabeth was pregnant before Catherine Parr, and the only evidence we have for a birth date of this supposed Edward Tudor Seymour, Shakespeare, is from Romeo and Juliet, when the nurse chats with Juliet and tries to establish exactly her birth date. She tries to recall what it was. And it turns out it was Lammas Eve. Mm-hmm. And that would be July 31st. What year? Probably 1548, which would mean Elizabeth had to be pregnant in 1547, late 1547. And we know that Thomas Seymour was pursuing Elizabeth almost from the time of Henry VIII's death, which would be late January 1547.
Well, he tried to marry her, right?
Right,
and,
absolutely.
And speaking of
twice.
Romeo and Juliet, it's kind of interesting because when Seymour first sort of announces his intentions to try to marry the Princess Elizabeth, she's 13 years old.
Right.
Just like
as Juliet.
Right. And you have this line where, the nobleman, County Paris, says to Lord Capulet, I want to marry your daughter. And Lord Capulet says, but she's only 13 years old. And Paris says, many a good bride has been made at, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he basically says, lots of wives become wives at 13.
The nurse also says the same thing.
Yeah. But Capulet said, it's interesting because Paris says, many a good wife has been made at 13. And Capulet says something to the effect of, many a good wife has been marred at 13, which
and
I always took to imply meaning that, too young for her to have sexual intercourse and carry a baby.
Yeah. Well, you've caught Oxford at his game. When he says marred, of course, that means to deface or in some way to mark. Mm-hmm. And as Mar is his name, Seymour, Sanmar, Saint Mar is the correct name of Seymour. When she has been marred, that means impregnated by Sanmar. Mm-hmm. This system works throughout Shakespeare. He speaks a double tongue. Double entendre is the whole game of Shakespeare, start to finish, with a lot of variations on it.
And now, so, how do the dates correspond? So we talked about Catherine Parr sending Elizabeth away, would that have been?
She would have been sent away. I think Catherine Parr probably knew that Elizabeth was pregnant for quite a while, and she sent Elizabeth away to Anthony Denny, the most trusted friend of Henry VIII, in, I think, July of 1548. And she stayed there for, an unknown amount of time, I think. But it was probably late 1548 before she went to her own place at Cheshunt, north of London.
And then Hatfield, right? She ends up at Hatfield.
Hatfield is her place at Cheshunt, yeah.
Yeah. And there is another record from her time at this new home, with basically these new foster parents, as it were. There are records there where the attendants talk about her falling very ill, suffering from headaches, suffering from stomach ailments, nausea, and one very particular mention of her having what were described as irregular menstrual cycles. So when you talk,
perhaps non-existent.
Correct. Well, irregular could mean, right?
Right.
And when you talk to any woman, like I mentioned this to my wife, and I'm like, let me just run this by you. And I didn't tell her the circumstances. I just said, let me just run this by you. There's this husband and wife, and the wife suspects that the husband's been messing around with their foster daughter and sends her away. And where she sends her, the foster daughter is suddenly suffering from headaches, nausea, and irregular menstrual cycles. And she immediately went, oh, he slept with her and got her pregnant, didn't he? Like, boom, like just boom. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a genius to put these pieces of this puzzle together.
Yes, it doesn't need a scientist, but an equivocator can hide it.
Sure.
And that's Shakespeare.
And so there are many who believe Elizabeth had a baby at that time.
Right.
And of course, the question is, was that baby Edward de Vere, which would make him Edward Tudor Saint-Mars Seymour?
Seymour, yeah.
Why do you believe that?
Well, it's been a long process. I've been thinking that for about 20 years. But, the core of Oxford Seymour theory is that the entire body of Shakespeare is a record of a memorial to Oxenford's life. He knew he was going to be erased from the historical record by his powerful father-in-law, William Cecil. And so he's done his best to contrive a method of hiding the full history of his life in his works. And so this is a big difference from Oxfordian theory, which proposes that Oxford skewered and parodied, satired many of the famous people in court at the time of Queen Elizabeth. In fact, it appears that he was only speaking of himself. All the different stories, all the 37 plays and more, as Mr. Prechter, Robert Prechter, has discovered. A lot of other material as well is telling the story of Oxford's life. So, did I just block you out?
No, I'm listening.
Oh, you're still there? Okay.
I'm intently listening.
Yeah, so the entire thing is a history of his life. No matter which play you go to, it is just an episode of Oxford's life. And it's indexed or referenced to his life. No matter what's happening to Hamlet, it's referenced to Oxford's life. Whatever is happening in Pericles or Much Ado About Nothing or Julius Caesar, it's indexed through a reference language to his own existence. And once you learn the system, you can read it as double entendre alternate history.
So one of the things that you bring out on your website and that you talk about in your research is something that I have always agreed with and have long said. I always say that if you really want to understand Shakespeare, you have to be multilingual the way that he was. And I believe he obviously, I think it's very clear that the writer of Shakespeare spoke multiple languages, at least 5. And of course, many of those being Latin-based languages. And so Latin, of course, is one of the key anchors to his language code. And there are plenty who believe that there's a lot of numerology and number code going on in the works of Shakespeare, and they connect that to either the Hebrew or the Greek numeric values of letters. But I also agree with you, and I think that more importantly than the number code system that some people have come up with in the 1740 and that type of stuff, I'm not disparaging that or doubting that some of that doesn't exist, but I do think that it's more clearly the language code. And as you say, these double entendres, these double meanings, these hidden words, the creation of new words, which we know no writer in history was a greater neologist than this writer, creating brand new words we've never seen before. And I think a lot of that is about, combining languages together to create a new word that helps reveal the truth he is trying to share.
Yeah. The language he speaks is not really English. That's another finding of Oxford Seymour. It's a combination, just as you say. It's English, Latin, and French primarily, but there's some Italian in there. There's an amount of Welsh as well. And
we know the Tudors were Welsh.
They were Welsh, and Princess Elizabeth had an attendant named Blanche Parry. And she was with Princess Elizabeth from her birth until her death in about 1572 or so. So for 30 years, she was a close attendant on Elizabeth. And she communicated with Elizabeth in Welsh on sensitive matters. That's well known in history. Mm-hmm. So I have found, for example, the name Mar or the word Mar in Welsh is M-A-W-R, meaning great, or it can be M-O-R, meaning the sea. So you see where the sea more comes in. When he discusses the sea or greatness or so, the word so that you see so often in Shakespeare, he's referring to the Welsh words that reflect his name.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but doesn't Thomas Seymour's great claim to fame is as a naval commander, right? Wasn't he an admiral?
Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of an honorary title.
Oh, okay.
As soon as Henry VIII died, they started distributing titles and properties around, and that's what the name of the game is. This is people are striving for wealth and position. And Lord Admiral was a position that came up because another fellow who became Northumberland, John Dudley, vacated that position when he became Earl of Warwick. And that's where he got the Bear and Ragged Staff title, addition to his name.
And Thomas Seymour's brother, he has a brother named Edward, right?
Yeah, Somerset. He was the Lord Protector.
Then Elizabeth, if Edward de Vere is truly the son of Elizabeth and Thomas Seymour, it's interesting that he'd be named after Thomas's brother Edward. It's not a common de Vere name.
No.
Edward.
No.
You've got a lot of Aubreys. You've got a few Roberts. but you don't have Edwards. Like, it's not a family name. And then suddenly there's this Edward.
Right.
You got Johns in the DeVere line.
A lot of Johns.
Yeah. So I thought, that's always very interesting too, because suddenly, why all of a sudden it's Edward? That's a weird one to me.
Right. Well, of course, if he was born in 1548, Edward VI was on the throne, and it was often an honorary name given to children during a reign.
Yeah, but he's also technically then the nephew of Edward VI.
He's a cousin.
Then, right?
Yeah, and it's sort of a nephew because of the close relationship of the Seymours and the Tudors at that time, since 1537 when Edward VI was born. It could go either way there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So these language clues, you point to plenty of them, and like to talk about a few of them. Like, one of the big ones that I want to get to is the first folio. But you obviously, Hamlet is huge. As You Like It is another one that I think is very, very interesting, and one of the plays that, from the authorship mystery standpoint, I think deserves a lot more study, and a greater level of microscope needs to be placed on that play as giving us plenty of clues about this whole thing. And then, we've talked about the Romeo and Juliet clues as well. And all of this is about recognition, isn't it? This is all about, I want the world to recognize who I am. I want the world, and eventually we're going to talk about his son and recognize who my son is. And in fact, my entire February bonus feature episode is about the theme of recognition and how it plays such a major part in the Shakespeare canon. This connects to that quite well. But you basically say Oxford's theme isn't, recognition is practically the same as asking the question, who is the true heir to the throne? And it being about succession. So tell me about a little bit more about that, and tell me about what you see there at the beginning of the folio that is sort of like the biggest clue to all of this.
Well, that's, it's come to me very recently. I've read that preface by Hemming and Condell many times over the last 30 years, and nothing really occurred to me. But then suddenly, now as everything else has come into focus in the entire canon, I noticed that the wording and the rhetorical scheme of that prefatory letter and the dedication letter together by Hemming and Condell tell a specific story in double entendre. And what we see is in the very first line of that letter, it says, to the great variety of readers. And you really have to go to my website to see how I've broken it down. I translate what is in apparent English into a kind of false Latin. That's his game for plays that are written and placed in Italy, Greece, in Vienna. Latin is a reference language, and so you might translate each word that you find into Latin and see what you find. You'll almost always find some connection with each word to his name. And that's exactly what he tells us in Sonnet 76. Every word doth almost tell my name. And he, not only that, where I came from and where I should be heading, which is the monarchy. Mm. And so it sounds very strange to people who are used to interpreting Shakespeare in a very lofty manner, that he would be playing with words to the extent that he really is. For example, to the is simply a playful interpretation of tuda. And there was, a letter in Middle English and Early English, I think it's the F. It's a TH sound. It looks like a D with a cross through it. So it's to the is tuda, Tudor. Great is translated into Latin as amplus, but it has a derivation, amplius. Amplus and amplius. Amplius means more. Variety, well, you can see the variety, and that means the condition of ver. And I believe that that's parenthetical. But the real kicker there is the word readers, to the great variety of readers, which is in Latin legens. Well, as any speaker of French can see, that's les gens, the families, the gens. So it could easily be interpreted in a kind of false Latin, Oxford's false Latin interpretations, to the great, to the more divers estate of these famous gens. That's taking as much of Latin semantical variation as I can add to it. Now, that sounds a little tenuous. So you go down through the document and you see that he has reinforced it. This is called Veronian wordplay. That's where you say the same essential thing, but you keep repeating it in different words.
Which he does throughout the canon. I mean, how many,
Right.
I mean, you know, being a Shakespearean actor and producer director of so many of the plays and so many of them so many times, I always say, if I don't do another Midsummer Night's Dream, I'll be happy. I mean, I've done 10 of them now in my lifetime. But it's one of those plays that every Shakespearean theater artist knows they will do again and again and again and again until the day you die. You'll keep doing A Midsummer Night's Dream. But
Yeah.
so many of the characters in so many of the plays say the same thing 8 different ways in their
Right.
speeches, in their monologues, in their soliloquies. And oftentimes when you're cutting a production down to size so that it's palatable for a modern audience, that's where you make your cuts. You look at a speech and you go, well, he already said this 5 different ways. Do we really need to hear it 10 different ways? And that's where you can often be tempted to make your cuts. In fact, as an Oxfordian, it is so hard to cut the plays. It used to be easy to cut the plays before I became an Oxfordian. But now as I'm an Oxfordian, I'm like, yeah, but this is Edward's voice. Oh, but Edward's making a point here. Oh, but and I have to remind myself the audience doesn't know that, right? Like the audience, the audience needs a 2-hour.
Emphasizing it.
The audience needs a 2-hour play, not a 3-hour play. We've got to figure out a way to make that happen. But yeah, it is a common theme for him to not just say it, but say it again and again and again, and now this way, and now that way, and now this way, and now that way.
Well, let me go through a couple. He mentions that the sale of books is, Hemming and Condell mentioned that the sale of books is what's important here. And so do so, but first buy. If you make a false Latin interpretation, it's do so, playing on the Latin facere, or French faire, to do. Well, to do is throughout Shakespeare is a representation of Tudor. So is more in Welsh, or in Latin, hoc modo, in the manner, or in the more indicated. And first is princeps, which is princely, firstly. By, here's the kicker. By is sumere. In English, to assume. So we get Tudor, Somor, but Sanmor principally. So he's reinforced what he said in the first line, to the great variety of readers. Then he does it again. But whatever you do, buy. And that translates to more door, modo, more door, quisnam, what name ever is Tudor Sanmar? These are the first messages to the reader who has never encountered Shakespeare. The first available copies of his full plays. This is what he has to. This is what Hemming and Condell have to say to us.
Now, a couple of things come to mind there. One, I don't speak Latin. I don't read Latin. My children are learning Latin right now at their school.
They should.
And we're thrilled about it, and they love it. It's one of their favorite subjects, which shocked us both when we first started. They started coming home with their Latin homework. But one of the things I've just learned through osmosis, watching them learn it, is in order to understand Latin, you have to understand conjugations and you have to understand declensions, and these are important.
That's important if you want to speak Latin.
Yes.
But that's not the game that Oxford is playing.
But if you understand those, does it help you understand this game he's playing? Because the order of words is different than what we're used to in English, right?
Yes.
Just like it's
absolutely.
true in very many Latin-based languages, like things, what we would say in English, we would say are out of order. Yeah. You know, like we would say, that's a very fat cat. And in Latin-based languages, they would say, this cat is very fat. You know what I mean? Type of a thing?
Sure.
Is that part of it?
Conjugation is not part of his game. The declining of words only rarely affects what he's saying.
Okay.
The important thing for the reader of Shakespeare is to understand the semantic range of the word in Latin and its root, and then transfer it to English, because a word may have a simple meaning in English, and then if we apply the analog in Latin to that word, we can show a much wider semantic range. Often there is the literal meaning and the figurative meaning. We know we have to go for the figurative meaning because that's what he tells us. Hamlet tells us he's going to catch the conscience of the king, meaning the queen. How? Tropically. He's going to use the figurative meaning of words. All important information. And that information that I call counsel is spread throughout the canon. It's not all in one place. It's regrettable that it isn't, but we have to remember that he is forbidden to speak his mind. He tells us 4 times in the sonnets that he is tongue-tied by authority.
Yes.
And who is the authority? Well, he tells us it's the Privy Council, but his mother also. His mother is complicit in the whole scheme. Well, what does that tell us? If he's forbidden to speak his mind, if he's tongue-tied, what does that say about the entire Shakespeare canon? Is it not perfect the way it is? Or is what we see on the printed page only an evocation of what he wants to say? Well, it has to be that, because he's not going to be able to talk about succession. Yeah, Roger Strittmatter has pointed out that the entire body of Shakespeare is around the theme of royal succession. But he's not allowed to say that. So what are we getting? We're getting only an evocation of his idea. So what does that mean for the reader? Well, you have to become a translator, an interpreter of what he said. That means that Oxford is writing esoteric writings. They're private writings. To make them publicly intelligible, you have to translate. Now, interestingly enough, Princess Elizabeth, had a tutor, Roger Ascham, in the late 1540s. And he later wrote a book called The Schoolmaster, in which he described the system of translating Latin into English and then back again. And it gives several different ways in which a word may be translated. You can look it up. I forget. It's a about page 47 or 49 of the Schoolmaster. You can find it online. And it shows how you can translate and end up with a different meaning. And that's exactly the scheme that Oxford's using.
Well, we hear that all the time. Probably, the whole term "lost in translation" is a real thing.
Exactly.
And probably the most glaring example of that throughout history is the Bible, right? So when we're translating the original texts of the Bible from Greek and Aramaic, and even the Old Testament being translated from Hebrew. I mean, just from Hebrew to Latin is a giant loss because the words don't actually mean exactly the same thing. From Greek to Latin and then from Latin to English is a giant loss, especially because there are so many words that don't even exist in some languages to refer to certain things. And also a larger variety of words that mean something similar but not exactly the same. And our guy is very big on that, right? Our guy is super big on using words that are close but not quite the exact same. Thus the whole thing of, I'm going to say this 8 different times because each way is a little bit different and means something just a little different emotionally, mentally, physically even.
Yeah, he's very clever. When he chooses a word that you need to look up and you find its analog, you'll find that its analog is precisely the word he intends in the alternate meaning. When you say things that are lost in translation, well, in his scheme, you find his meaning in translation.
That's his code. That's his gimmick. That's his thing.
That's his scheme. Yeah. So it's fascinating stuff. If I'm wrong, it's still about the most interesting thing I've done.
Well, again, I go back to, I think if you really want to get to the bottom of this, you have to learn other languages. And
you really
very
don't.
Few of the scholars that I know who consider themselves to be at the top of this game speak anything more than English. So they probably ought to start learning some languages. I'm already focusing on learning Italian. But you say Italian's not going to be one of the more important ones with regards to this. But I'm learning Italian for another reason. I want to live there someday. So there you go.
Wonderful. I love Italy.
But I feel like it's going to help me understand all of this a lot more anyway. My kids learning Latin, I can't wait till they can start explaining some of this to me because they're becoming very fluent in Latin all of a sudden. So they're going to be my little minions. They're going to help me unlock some of these codes. But I always thought, some of these folks who are like, I am a great Shakespeare scholar. Yeah, what languages do you speak? English.
I don't want to scare people away. I don't want to scare people away by insisting on learning another language. But if you take an interest in the etymology of English words, you'll come to the same place. And, it's wonderful to know the roots and the tributary languages to English. And when you say a word, to understand what the etymology of it is, it really improves your experience with language.
Well, and again, as I mentioned, what's one of the most wonderful things, and I find this in rehearsals with actors, because I tell actors all the time, it used to be back in the day, we would have a dramaturge who would be on staff, as it were, for a production of Shakespeare. And actors would go to that person and at the end of a rehearsal and ask questions. Hey, can you answer me this question? Can you tell me about this word? Can you give me the origins of this? And then the next rehearsal, the dramaturge would come back with the answers. And sometime in rehearsal would be used, like reviewing some of that stuff. Today we have Google and we have Bing and we have all these other search engines. AI can be our dramaturge now. We don't necessarily need a person committed to going and looking things up in the library anymore. So I tell actors all the time, there's no excuse. And in fact, I say it very bluntly and very clearly. Don't you dare step on my stage and speak words that you don't know what they mean.
Excellent.
You have at your fingertips, in your back pocket, a resource that you can use to answer any of those questions. So don't you dare be lazy about it. If there's a word on the page and you don't know what it means or you don't know where it comes from, you look it up before you come step on my stage and just start spewing language.
And that's wonderful.
Oftentimes they'll come back to me and go, well, I looked up this word and it says that the word originates right here in this play that I'm about to speak the word. And I'm like, yep, that's true. There's a lot of that. There's an awful lot of that. So now let's dig into, what is he trying to say? What does he mean? What pieces of other languages is he using to create this new word? And why is it so important to this character to convey this thought in such a way that is brand new, that no one has ever heard before? And how
brand
important,
new but old.
Yeah, and how important do you think it is to that character then to convey this thought if they're using a brand new word to describe what it is?
Horace Furness. Horace Furness is the guy who started the Variorums back in the 1870s, I think. And I love those books. They give the opinions of famous commenters on Shakespeare. And one of the things he says over and over is that the writer Shakespeare, the poet, never does anything without a reason. He was convinced, and I don't think anybody knew Shakespeare better than Horace Furness. Never does anything without a reason. So if that word appears, it has a well-established meaning, and Oxford is convinced that it will contribute to his story.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Right.
I want to shift gears for a second, and I want to talk about the sonnets. You've mentioned them a couple of times, and there are many of us who believe the sonnets are indeed the roadmap, the true key here to unraveling this mystery.
Before you do, I just want to comment on something I came across not too long ago. There's a poem by Robert Browning, one of my favorite poets. It's called House from 1876, I think it was. And it's a response to a poem by Wordsworth on the importance of the sonnets. And Browning tells kind of a narrative in narrative poetic form about a house that is, the front of it is shaken down by an earthquake. And suddenly the people on the street who've never been privy to what's going on in the house can see inside. And they discuss all the strange goings on in the house, but it ends this way. Hoity-toity, a street to explore. Your house is the exception. With this key, Shakespeare unlocked his heart once more. Did Shakespeare? If so, the less Shakespeare he. So Robert Browning got it. He understood that the sonnets were revealing something greater than Shakespeare. And I believe he takes that from the ending of Hamlet. Hamlet's last words are the occurrence more and less. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yes, I know it very well.
Yeah, his final words. He's about to tell us something. Hamlet was about to tell us something, but he died the very next breath. And so I believe that the occurrence, more or less, are the two facets of Oxford's life. To William Cecil and Robert Dudley, he was Edward de Vere. They gave him that name. They assigned him at birth, almost, or a little later, perhaps in April of 1550. But his real name is Edward Tudor Seymour. That is the more, the Saint Maur. Mm-hmm. The less is the Leicester name, because Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, governed his life and took control of his properties when he was in his minority. Okay, I just wanted to point out that Robert Browning foresaw this, the importance of the sonnets in telling the story of another identity.
Well, and that line is important too, because the less Shakespeare he.
The less Shakespeare he, yeah.
Right. He is so much more than that.
Yeah.
Right?
The Lester, and he uses the word lesser frequently. You can use your open source program to find out exactly where he uses words. And lesser is the Lester. His assigned,
definitely no love lost identity there.
Yeah.
In that whole circle.
Okay, you were going to talk about the sonnets.
Yes, and before I do though, I do remember I wanted to ask you a question about Hemming and Condell. Did they really write it? They didn't write it.
No, it's done brilliantly. It's done as brilliantly as Oxford could do it himself. And it's possible that Oxford wrote it earlier in his life, foreseeing that someday it would be published. But Ben Jonson is the likely writer.
And obviously we're just going to throw these names on top of it as more of the subterfuge. Yeah. And we're going to talk about the first folio a little bit more as we crawl through this, because I think it's important that we need to go back to that as we tell this part of the story. But I want to touch on the sonnets because, as I was about to say, I have come more and more to believe that the sonnets are sort of like the key to the map.
Yes.
To the entire canon. And I think if you lay the sonnets on top of the canon, you suddenly start to understand the canon exceptionally well in a totally different new way.
They work in tandem. The information from the sonnets is duplicated in the plays themselves.
But I think it's also very obvious to me and to many of the listeners of this program that the sonnets are about a father-son relationship.
Yes.
And that here we have Edward de Vere wanting, we get this whole theme of recognition, as we've mentioned. And if the initial theme is the recognition of self, I am a true Tudor Seymour. I am not a de Vere. The sonnets become more about recognition of the boy. And if the Oxford Seymour theory is correct, then that would make Henry Wriothesley the grandson of Elizabeth.
Exactly.
Now, there are plenty who believe that the sonnets are about a romance between Edward de Vere and Queen Elizabeth, and
not a chance.
The offspring being Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton. And one of the things that kind of creeps people out, they get freaked out about, is they're like, well, if Edward de Vere is actually her son, does she have a love affair with her own son, and then they have a son? Either way, regardless of that complication and the weird incest issue, Henry Wriothesley is a direct blood descendant of the Queen, one way or the other here. And if we follow the Oxford Seymour theory, what we have is Edward encouraging the Queen to recognize her grandson as the heir to the throne.
Yeah.
And so I don't see that the sonnets with regards to that are any different. And I don't see that Elizabeth's motivation to spare Henry Wriothesley as opposed to all of the other members of the Essex Rebellion who are put to death. Other than she knows that boy has her blood running through his veins.
Right. Yeah, the sonnets can stand alone, but you have to interpret them correctly. But fortunately, we have the plays that, as I say, duplicate the information. So we can go back and say, if I think that Henry Wriothesley might be the son of the Queen, you go through the plays, and are there any examples where an analogous situation shows something different? And sure enough, there are several places where the brown factor, the mother of Henry Wriothesley, comes into play. And as I sent you that note, there's a lengthy jest in the first part of Henry IV, where Hal is playing a joke on the drawer, Francis, in the Boar's Head Tavern. And
the drawer being the bar,
Francis,
the bar tap, the tapper.
The bar, yeah, exactly.
He's drawing drafts of beer.
Yeah, he's not only a drawer of drinks, but also of harrows, which is something you pull behind a tractor nowadays.
Right, right.
In Oxford's time, they're drawn behind an ox.
You know, that's where we get the word rehearse, as in rehearse a play.
Yeah.
Is from the word harrow, to re-harrow, to replow the field.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody has understood that joke. The variorums of Furness came out and said that this is placed in the text to show that the wit of Hal is nothing compared to the brilliant wit of Falstaff. Well, Oxford Seymour theory can show that they are the same person. They're just two facets. Falstaff takes the place of Horatio in Hamlet. He represents the written word and the collection. He is the head of a band of 150, his company of soldiers. And as Robert Prechter has hypothesized, there are over 150 other writers, other allonyms, pseudonyms that Oxford used. The troop of Falstaff is the combined group of false writers, all using Oxford's name. And anyways, take a look in your book. In Act 2, Scene 4, Hal says, "Then your brown bastard is your only drink." Well, it so happens that any play set in France or England uses French as its reference language, as opposed to Latin. So that holds. Every now and then there's a rare standard exception, but that's what you need to compare it with. So your brown bastard is your only drink. Drink in French is boisson. And that is simply a pun on boy, son. So Francis, the name means verus, true or frank, has only one son. And he is the brown bastard. He would be the son of Mary Brown Wriothesley, impregnated by Oxford.
Okay, so
that's where we get Henry Wriothesley.
There are ways about that track. One thing that I really like about that is it definitely solves the incest issue, doesn't it? Because if the third Earl of Southampton is Edward's son, and I believe he is, but he is not Edward's son by the Queen, but rather Edward's son by Mary Brown Wriothesley, which would make sense as to then why he becomes a Wriothesley and becomes the third Earl of Southampton. It's not a changeling in the sense that he's being placed with her. It's just a changeling in the sense that the second Earl of Southampton is accepting another man's son as his own. And we'll get to that in a second as to why he might do that. But here's some details I think the listeners need that I also found to be very interesting. So Mary Brown Wriothesley became a bride at the age of 13. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is.
Just like Elizabeth was courted at the age of 13 by Thomas Seymour. Mary Brown Wriothesley is married to the second Earl of Southampton at the age of 13. P.S. Mary Brown Wriothesley's father was actually the first Viscount Montague
Yeah.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
No, my kids love this stuff.
Right? Another interesting thing to point out is that the second Earl of Southampton was a devout Catholic. And through his lifetime, he was caught up in many plots and scandals that resulted mostly in house arrests, where they literally were trying to convert him to Protestantism. And in one case, the sentence was sort of like Shylock. Well, if you follow the precepts, if you do the Protestant prayers and you go to the Protestant services, then, and your sponsor, whose home you are now in house arrest, if they will stand for you and say, yes, he is now a good Protestant, then you can be freed. I think that's a crazy story. But ultimately that didn't work, and he ends up in the Tower. Now, he ends up imprisoned in the Tower of London from October 1571 until the 1st of May 1573. That's 18 months that he is in prison. Now, these are important dates because 5 months after his release, this is important math, ladies and gentlemen, he's released on May 1st, 1573. 5 months later, his wife, Mary Brown, gives birth to Henry Roseley, the third Earl of Southampton. Now, there is no mention that this baby is like deathfully premature.
Are we talking rabbits or humans?
Right? Even if the second Earl of Southampton jumps right in bed with his wife, Mary Brown, on the day of his release, there is no way she's giving birth to a healthy baby boy 5 months later. It is absolutely impossible that child would have survived.
Now, they have worked around that, of course, one way or another. And somebody proposed that he had, that the second Earl had visiting rights from his wife at the appropriate time. There
is nothing in the record that proves that.
No. Yeah, it's not a question of proof. I suppose what I think is, the question is what Oxford thinks, because he only writes what he thinks. And one never knows about where children come from, especially not at that time. And I think he says at some point, if every man whose child, who supported a child that wasn't his, knew of it, they would all hang themselves from the nearest tree or something to that
I believe
effect.
That's very true about all of the aristocracy of England, and I believe it's true to this day. I've had listeners write me and tear me a new one because of some of the things I've said about the current royal family. But I'm like, just look at your own history. It's always the Brits too. They get really upset when you make comments about the current royal family. But look at your own history. I mean, this is not uncommon. This is not new throughout the history of England and the aristocracy of England. It's just a thing. But here is another thing I think it's very important. So here is Henry Roseley, the second Earl of Southampton, this devout Catholic who is a convicted Catholic traitor, even implicated in some of the Campion plots, the Jesuit plots, which is what ended up throwing him in prison for 18 months. He is released when what we could look at and see when his wife is about 4 months pregnant. He's released from prison when she's 4 months pregnant. 5 months later, she has a baby. The second Earl of Southampton writes to a dear friend of his how excited he is that he finally has a son and an heir. And something really interesting happens. The Queen herself starts treating this convicted Catholic traitor very kindly. A woman who isn't known for being kind. She gives him small little titles. She offers him small little agreements here where he can make a little money there and make a little money here. She starts looking out for the second Earl of Southampton.
Yep.
Why would she do that? Maybe because she knows that that's her grandson in his home.
Yeah. And remember who the second Earl was plotting with. It was the Duke of Norfolk. And maybe we recall what happened to his accomplice. He was beheaded,
yes,
right?
Yes. These Catholic traitors don't do well, but suddenly this Catholic traitor gets a pass.
The exception.
Yes. And however, I think another thing that's important to note is Mary Brown doesn't want anything to do with her husband when he gets out of prison. They remain estranged for a long time. Until he ends up even winds up forbidding her from seeing an unnamed person that he monikers as being someone of common origin, something about a commoner. He calls him a commoner. It's an insult. Right?
Yeah, a common person. And well, as we know from Hamlet, the word common is a key word. And it's because it is a playful version of saumon in French, right? If you put a C cedilla instead of the hard C, common is saumon, which is summer. And he does give a name, a Mr. Dunsame. And if you look at this Hemming and Condell preface, you'll see that Tudor Moor is the same as done same. Done is the past participle of to do, and same is the so or see of Seymour. I know it sounds a little vague. You really have to play with Oxford's wordplay for a long time to realize that it's as obvious as it is to me.
But you don't have to play with the historical record at all, because suddenly the second Earl forbids his wife from seeing this person that has this, very interesting name and description, which is, very suspicious. Whether that person is Edward, who has been secretly wanting to see his son, or whether it is a commoner or a servant or someone who's a go-between, that the second Earl is like, that's enough. This is my boy. He's my heir. His only heir, by the way, because he does. Mary Brown has two other children, both girls. One of them dies very young. She obviously isn't capable of bearing any more sons. It's quite possible, and it was so terrible because often the women got blamed for this, but we know it was the men who were the problem, and it's possible that the second Earl had issues, having issues, as it were.
Right.
So this is his only hope, which would explain why he would accept this boy as his heir, but then he definitely doesn't want the real father around at all.
Especially not if he's the son of the queen.
Right. And what can he do about it? Especially since it seems like probably a condition of his release from the tower was accepting this.
Yeah.
And being quiet about it. And the timing makes it easy for them to claim that it's his child. If he stays in the tower for another 5 months, that is a big problem. So he's released when it becomes too difficult for Mary Brown to hide a pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting part of this. But when the second Earl dies, though, he leaves two of his Catholic buddies in charge of his estate. And Mary Brown fights it. And her representative in this, we'll call it a probate challenge, is none other than Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who serves as her chief counsel.
Interesting.
And he wins the case for her.
Doesn't he always?
Yes. So she gets her share. Her son, of course, becomes a ward of the court because the father's dead. That's exactly the same time that Edward de Vere reconciles with his wife and Cecil. The boy is now living at Cecil House, and suddenly Edward de Vere has access to his 7-year-old son.
Yeah, you mentioned this common person done same who is accused of playing hanky-panky with
Mary Brown.
Mary Brown. I had a blank out there. I'm sorry.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
One other important note here is while Henry, 3rd Earl of Southampton, is living at Cecil House. Now he's 7 going on 8 years old. While he's living in the Cecil House, Mary Brown is allowed to visit him and see him and spend time with him throughout his lifetime there. She
sticks close to Oxford throughout her life also.
She remains an unmarried widow until after Henry comes into his majority at the age of 21. She does not remarry until he is 22 years old.
Yeah.
She stays faithful to Edward, perhaps to some degree, definitely to her son, does not take another husband until after he assumes his lands and titles.
I remember now what I was going to say.
That's 14 years of her life that she could have been on the market and found a new husband and chooses not to.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure of all the dates, but I did want to recall one thing. This the position of Oxford in the affair with the Duke of Norfolk and the 2nd Earl of Southampton was that he was acting as a go-between and a conspirator to spring both of them from the Tower of London. Do you remember that story?
Yes. Arundel.
Yeah, he purchased
and
a
Howard,
ship,
right?
No, not Arundel. Oxford did it alone, I believe. He in 1572 or 1571, before the Duke of Norfolk was executed, of course, he purchased a boat and was going to spirit both Norfolk and Southampton away from the Tower of London and take them to the continent. And when the Duke of Norfolk wrote his final letter to his children, he mentioned that the only person who could save him at this point was the Earl of Oxford. And what gave this 21-year-old nobleman the power to do that? Who knows? Except that he might have power with the Queen.
Well, he certainly had a certain level of immunity, didn't he?
Right.
And certainly the 3rd Earl of Southampton had an even greater level of immunity. No regard. I mean, no single, those two men, Edward and Henry, they stepped in more dung through their lifetimes when it came to the Elizabethan court. Like they stepped in shit everywhere they went. My mother used to have a saying, God rest her, when she was alive. Sometimes when I would get myself into trouble, she would say, Stephen, there could be one pile of dog shit in the middle of a field and you would step in it. And that were these guys, right? That was these guys. I mean, they stepped in it left and right, and by all accounts should have lost their heads several times, and neither of them did.
Yeah.
What kind of immunity is that? Why are they the exception to the rule this way?
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Michael, I want to say that this has been fascinating, and I wanted to make sure we tell the listeners again, because I'm certain they're all have 1,000 questions, and I get emails from people who say I was shouting at my headphones, or I was shouting at my speaker, or I was shouting at the car radio, or however, wherever they're listening to the program. You know, there's always listeners out there who are shouting back with answers or with questions, and I'm sure there are plenty of you who have both. Obviously, you can always email me your questions, contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. But to find more answers to a lot of these questions, you definitely want to dive into Michael's work. And we would be remiss if we didn't also credit your son, right, Michael,
Yes.
who has been assisting you with this for quite some time
Actually,
now.
both my sons have been helping me quite a bit with this.
That's awesome. Make it a family affair. I love it. And the website, folks, is oxford-seymour.com. And remember, Seymour is spelled Seymour. And of course,
let me correct that. It's Seymour.
sorry, did I say it wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, it's right here in front of me. I'm stupid.
Sey.
Yes, Seymour.
Yeah. MOU.
As in Thomas Seymour.
Yeah.
And I'll be putting a link to that too on our Patreon page. So those of you who follow us on the Patreon page, you'll be able to find it there as well. Oxford-Seymour.com. And you can find a lot of these answers and a lot more about some of the other stuff that Michael and his sons have been digging into. And as I always say here on the program, we're not here to tell you what to believe. We're here to share what our research leads us to believe and to inspire you to go and do your own research and find your own rabbit holes to crawl into and your own stones to uncover. And I believe that no time is wasted in uncovering new stones or stones that have already been turned over. I don't trust the quote unquote authorities who say, oh, we've already investigated that and there's nothing to see there. A fresh set of eyes on everything is always important. And anybody who has ever written anything or edited anything knows that you can look past the same typo 1,000 times and then you give it to someone else and they're like, oh, you have a typo right here. And I think that's true about research as well. So don't be hindered by who have come before or what they tell you is the absolute definitive answer on any topic. Go dig into your own issues, your own ideas, the things that intrigue you the most about this great mystery. It is all of us serving as super sleuths on our own journey through this mystery that is eventually going to find the real truth. And so thank you, Michael, for sharing and for all the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did have a question. There was a fellow on your show. His name was Luis from Portugal.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What's his last name?
Luis Souza, Souza.
Okay, yes. I wanted to do some research on him. He got the story very close to correct. He thought the name of the poet was Love, and Amor is the correct answer. But he's got it.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure. See more.
Yeah, he understood.
Yeah. Luis has been a great guest multiple times. And in fact, one of our most popular guests last year, the episode featuring him was the most downloaded episode of the year. So the listeners tend to really enjoy when Luis comes on to share what he has
wild
studied.
And crazy guy.
He is indeed. And, but a very private man as well. So many people have written and asked, how can I find his research? Where can I find more about him? And he doesn't share a lot of his. He doesn't post it anywhere, and he only shares it privately. And if you listen back to the latest episode with him, which was last year, he does give an email address that you can write to request information from him. I don't recall what it is right now, but you can find it there in that episode.
Super.
Well, thank you again. Awesome. The whole Mary Brown thing was something that had been like sort of, I don't know, sort of whispered or suggested here and there in a minor way in the past, but never really truly dove into it until you sent me your information. And now when you look at some of the circumstances and details, it sure does raise a lot of questions. And of course, here on the program, that's what we like, right?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. If you recall from The Tempest, the was it Gonzalo who faced certain death with the breakup of the ship? And what was he looking for? Some brown furs, some brown Plantagenets. That's again a reference to Mary Brown.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? And then, of course,
Yeah.
like I said, the whole Montague connection, the similarity in the age of her and Elizabeth.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, very intriguing stuff. So lots
Oh,
more
super.
research to do. Thank you, Michael, again.
Thank you, Steve.
Before closing out this episode, I do want to shout out to our March Quiller of the Month. Her name is simply Heidi. No last name provided at her Patreon membership profile. Just Heidi, kind of like Madonna or Cher or even Charo, who, by the way, is still alive. God bless her. Thank you, Heidi, for being a Patreon patron, and I hope you look forward to receiving your free Quiller swag item. You too can join our Patreon page with only a handle, your own handle, either your first name only, your last name only, your clever superhero name, just in case you don't want the rest of the world to know your secret identity. Just pop on over to patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger, patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger, or you can find the link right from our homepage. It's the red button. Click on that button right from the homepage at don'tquillthemessenger.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com, or any of those ways that you find us. Happy birthday to producer Jake. This is his birthday month, and we want to wish him a very happy birthday. Also, happy anniversary to the Dragon Wagon Radio Network. We are so proud to be a part of the Dragon Wagon Radio Network, where you can find a great variety of interesting podcasts. Go check out Dragon Wagon Colleagues, because you might find something else that you want to add to your listen list. And you can do that by going to the Dragon Wagon Radio Network homepage, where you will find a list of all of the podcasts that are available there, including us, of course. And then just one reminder to visit monumentalshakespeare.com, 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 to get yourself registered for our Shakespeare and the Law event at Gray's Inn, London, May 9th. The time is ticking. We are drawing nearer to this remarkable and very exciting event. We just sent out hundreds of emails to barristers, solicitors, and law clerks throughout London, and those registrations are now rolling in. Make sure to reserve your seat before it's too late. Remember, all the information you need is at monumentalshakespeare.com, monumentalshakespeare.com. Come make history with us as we set the historical record straight. We will look forward to seeing you face to face in May. Until then, come right back here every fortnight for more exciting and interesting guests as we further explore this great literary mystery and, of course, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.